I want to show our slides and go ahead and show that one more. Okay, it's there. All right. Thank you for tuning in. We have a very special guest tonight, Dr. Guy Clark. Not only was he a doctor, but he also flew Phantoms. We're going to be talking with him tonight on the show. Be sure to tune in to our shows the second and fourth Wednesday of the month. Got a couple of real quick announcements I want to make about Ken Burns' series on Vietnam that's coming out. There's going to be some special screenings. If you want to get a pen and paper ready, so I'm going to go through this fast because I don't want to take up Doc's time much. But August 28th in Wilmington, the Fantail of the North Carolina battleship will be shown. What they're showing is a 1 or 2 hour trailer for the 10-part miniseries. It also will be September 6th in Welcome in Lexington, Richard Childress Racing Museum and Gift Shop, Veteran Coffee and screening hosted by Rowan County Hospice and Palliative Care. September 7th, Southern Pines Sand Hills Community College, 7 p.m. screening and discussion on leadership during the war. September 11th will be in Asheville, site to be determined, most probably at the UNCA, 7 p.m. screening and panel discussion. UNCA, Mountain View, room 7, 8:30 p.m. On September the 14th, Raleigh, North Carolina Museum of History, 7 p.m. screening and panel discussion on the history of the war and what led us to be in the conflict. I will be a part of that panel, so be sure and come out and see us there. I don't know whether they're going to let me record it or not, but if you live anywhere in these areas, you need to come in and see the show on that particular one. September 17th, 21st, 24th, and 28th, 8 to 10 p.m. nightly, UNC TV broadcast on the 10-part Vietnam miniseries. See the ad at Facebook, War PBS. My tongue's not working today. September 29th, Vietnam Learning and Healing Counseling, 9 p.m. on UNC TV. If you live anywhere in the area, they would like to have some people on a panel to talk about the impact of the Vietnam War series on veterans and their families. This program will discuss how to handle the emotions of the series and the war itself with counselors on hand to answer questions and guide viewers through the grieving process and learn from experts on the field. October to be determined, the Fayetteville Airborne and Special Operations Museum. They're going to be showing it there around the clock. If you haven't been to the Airborne and Special Operations Museum in Fayetteville, you need to go, whether you see the movie or just go see that. Either one, it's well worth the trip. If you are in a crisis or know a veteran that's in a crisis, call the number there on your screen, 1-800-273-8255, press 1, and tell someone there that you need to talk to someone or have your veteran or do it for them, but reach out to the crisis hotline. Okay, now we're going to switch over and get to our guest. I didn't want to use up too much of his time. Marcia is there, and she is the publisher of the book, and she can pronounce the big words of all the things the doctor does. He is a busy man, very renowned doctor there in California. And Marcia, I'm going to let you read his intro, and we'll hope his head doesn't swell too big to not fit the screen, because he's done a lot of good stuff. Marcia, go ahead.
Thanks, Bill. You're absolutely right. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Guy Clark, who has written a memoir called Shark Bait, A Flight Surgeon's Odyssey in Vietnam. It's just been published from Weeping Willow Books. The doc is served in Vietnam for a year, from June 66 to June 1967, and he was stationed at Cam Ranh Bay as a flight surgeon. And while he was there, he also flew more than 90 bombing missions over Vietnam as part of his duty there. Today, he lives and works here in Santa Barbara, California. He's the founder and medical director of the Arthritis Institute of Santa Barbara and the Osteoporosis Institute of Santa Barbara. He's also a founding fellow of the American Rheumatism Association and the American College of Rheumatology. He has served as a senior aviation medical examiner for the Federal Aviation Administration since 1971. For his service in Vietnam, the doctor received the Bronze Star, 3 Air Medals, the Vietnam Cross of Gallantry, and the Vietnam Service Medal. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Guy Clark.
Guy, glad to have you on the show tonight. Been looking forward to it for a long time. Thank you for being with us, and welcome home, as we Vietnam veterans say. Good.
Thank you.
Tell us how you, first of all, what made you decide to become a doctor?
I went into medicine for the exclusive purpose of getting into the space program.
Okay.
I joined the Air Force my last year in medical school at Northwestern, and I interned at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. From there, I went to flight surgeon school, and while as an intern, I was one of 3 doctors that were chosen to train for the man orbiting laboratory.
Mm-hmm.
The 2 other doctors that were with me were more qualified than I. One was a Navy jet-rated pilot in addition to an MD. The other was an Air Force jet-rated pilot. I couldn't pass the 20/20 vision, but I was more interested in the atmospheric support levels in a low Earth orbit satellite.
Uh-huh.
When Vietnam started to heat up, my gut instinct was that we were getting into a war, and I thought the program was a combination with NASA, and NASA is a publicly funded agency that depends on the goodwill of the public, and there's never been a war in history that's not unpopular with somebody. And I said, the Air Force can't sleep in the same bed with NASA in a time of war. So I had the dubious honor of being the first to resign from the program. And from there, after I went to flight surgeon school, I went to Bergstrom Air Force Base in Austin, Texas, and got a chance to fly B-52s and KC-135s before I went to Vietnam.
You had a pilot's license while you were in school?
Just a private pilot's license.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And you went to Vietnam in 67 to 68?
66.
66, that's right, 66 to 67. Yeah. And you were stationed at Can Bay?
That was my primary duty station, yeah.
Okay, but you your job traveled quite a bit.
I spent a couple months down in the Delta.
Yeah. What does a flight surgeon do?
Flight surgeon, your responsibility is to take care of the pilots and the air crew members. There was an Air Force regulation that doctors would not fly on combat missions, but it also stated that unless the wing commander considered it desirable for morale purposes or whatever, and he did. The hospital commander, who was my boss, was an ex-P-51 pilot in World War II. He thought we should fly, and we agreed, and so we flew. It was the first week I was in country. The squadron commander came by and gave me a 3-inch thick book about the aircraft with all these circuits and electrical systems and whatnot. And I looked at it and laughed. He said, "Learn everything in this and we'll fly next week." There's no way I could have learned everything in there. So the next week we went out and gave me a checklist. He said, "Do this and this and this. And if that doesn't work," and he reached above his head to fool the ejection handle or beneath the seat, and he says, "And if none of that works, get the hell out of here."
Now you flew, what did you fly primarily?
The Phantoms, F-4C.
Okay. Tell the audience just what that does. It's a jet, fighter jet. It also take bombs.
It could haul as many bombs as B-29s in World War II. My missions were primarily in country. I didn't go up over Hanoi. I flew the back seat position. The difference is in the aircraft, the Navy Phantom, you cannot fly it from the back seat. But you can in the Air Force uses the back seat to train their pilots to fly in the front seat.
Okay. So you did then a lot of your missions were support missions for ground troops then?
That's correct.
Okay. I know they really appreciated seeing you come out, so.
Well, it was, we were usually moving so fast that when they chewed at us, we weren't there when the bullet got there.
I don't know. I saw a Phantom dropping a napalm one time. It looked like he was you could just see him, and he looks like he was going to be hair, teeth, and eyes in the ground before he turned up. He went straight down and then finally turned and just hung. I believe you could have knocked him out of the air with a slingshot at that when he made that turn to come up. And
well, it's good that there weren't any duck hunters over there. Otherwise,
oh yes, yes, sir. All right. So the Phantoms, for you out there, the Phantom, I believe I have a picture at the end of Dr. Clark's slide series, which we're going to start right now. Let him tell you a little bit about it. You want to go through the whole thing and talk about it? Or you want to do it as you talk about your book, one step at a time? You tell me how you want to do it.
Well, I can take you through my first mission or two. The first two missions, I couldn't get my head out of my lap because of the G-forces.
Yes, sir.
And finally, I told myself that the pilot in the front seat is made out of the same flesh and blood as I am and responds to gravity the same way as I do. How the heck does he do it? And I watched him, and he wedged his head between the canopy and the seat back to lock his head in there so it wouldn't be floating around and jerked down.
Yeah.
Once I learned that trick, I was all right.
Now, in the back seater, were you considered the navigator?
We did the navigation. The Phantom was the first plane to have an inertial navigation system on board. That was the only way you could find your way in a jungle that had no land navigation aids. But you dial in the coordinates of your target, and then you fly the needle to it. And when you got close to the target, you pick up what we called a bird dog, a FAC.
Yeah.
And he would use his white phosphorus rockets to mark the target.
Those of you out there watching who don't understand what a bird dog is, that's a crazy person who flies in a Piper Cub low and slow so people to shoot at him so that he can tell guy here where to shoot back. He's kind of a flying target. And then guy goes in and blows them away. That's how the system works. He flies low and slow, gets people to shoot at him, becomes the target, and the guy takes care of them. Would that be how you would describe them?
Yes, we did some intelligence work, and the Viet Cong that we interviewed at various places were told that you never shoot at a bird dog because the big boys will come in and nail you. Yeah. So you let him get by, but yes. They did.
All right, we're going to start the slide series, and I think you can see them. No? All right, the first one we got is the Shark Bait, A Flight Surgeon's Odyssey in Vietnam, 66 and 67. All right. Do you want to comment on that other than what we've already talked about?
No, some of the slides you have there show various scenes.
Okay. The next one is you in Can Bay out in front of a bunker.
That's correct. That was toward about halfway through the tour when we had 5 flight surgeons at the office at one time. I'm in the lead position there.
Mm-hmm.
And
is this the office?
That was the bunker right outside of the flight surgeon's office.
All right, so that was a bunker, or was it the office?
Oh, no, the office was a steel quantity.
Regular. That's where Mama San went to use the bathroom, and you went in when you were getting mortared.
Well, actually, we put some toilets out there for Mama's son.
Oh, y'all were a lot different than where you were farther down south, down in Long Binh area around Saigon. Mama's son's favorite place was the bathroom and so forth was the cool bunker. But yeah, all right. Next one is that's you getting in the Phantom, I guess, with your helmet there.
That's correct. Yeah.
Mr. Cool pilot with those aviation sunglasses.
Oh, those are Air Force issue.
Air Force, okay. I tell you what, you're Mr. Robert Redford in that one. You probably got all the baby sons with that one.
Yeah.
All right. The next picture is a picture that says flight path. and you're kind of going
Well,
up and down. I guess that's how you flew around over the trees.
no, that was when I was learning how to fly this supersonic airplane. I'd never flown one like that before, and I would over control it. Whenever you're driving a car, you turn in a direction or accelerate, and it goes. But in a supersonic airplane, it takes a while for the turbines to spin up, and you push the throttle forward, trying to maintain formation, and nothing would happen. So I push them forward more, and then all of a sudden it would go. And so it was just up and down like a porpoise going through the air until I learned what I was doing.
Yes.
Uh,
Well, to think about it out there, if you're in a jet like that and you're flying, if you see something, it's probably too late if
That's
it's your
true.
level because you're going there so fast. All right.
That's
The next slide is your Vietnam street scene. Lots of mama sons, papa sons out there. And it looks like it's a market of some kind.
that may have been in Vung Tau or Can Tho. I can't recall.
I believe from earlier pictures it was in Can Tho.
Okay, that would fit. This was just a generic street scene.
Yeah.
But I spent a month in the Can Tho area and another month in the Vung Tau area.
Right. The next one shows helicopter rescue, and it shows a slick coming in. Did you fly helicopters in it?
This was when I had to go down into the jungle to investigate a crash. This was not a war declared by Congress, so the civilian rules of the Air Force applied. We had a F-4 to crash in the mountains above Vietnam, above Cam Ranh, and the bodies were out there for 2 weeks. But there was an Air Force regulation that a doctor, a flight surgeon, and a senior pilot would have to investigate every crash. Now, there were photographic documentation of over 2,000 North Vietnamese regularly within 2 miles of the crash site.
I was getting ready to say that's a good way to lose a doctor and a pilot, sending them out there to.
It is. We took about 75 Korean Marines to accomplish a hot insertion, and we hiked through the jungle, hacked our way through it from a path that no reasonable person would ever go to. And we finally got into the crash site and got evidence for the bodies and whatnot and got out of there. But it was a hazardous situation. The Army pilots who were flying the helicopters almost mutinied because they'd been shot up so much in that same area and they didn't want to go back in there.
I can understand that. I have a friend of mine that was Air Force pararescue. And he had to go down by a rope down on the ground, and I can't imagine y'all having to hike in from a distance in a bad guy controlled area.
Well, at first, before this venture into it, the Air Force had sent me and a senior pilot out in a helicopter to use a 200-foot rope down in the jungle with an M16 and a 45 rifle by ourselves until better heads prevail. And I told them, get the hell out of there. We're not going to add more corpses to this mountain.
Yes, that's great, especially as valuable as y'all are to the troops and morale. Also, it wouldn't look good for a flight surgeon to be out on the ground humping it through the jungle, and the leeches and the snakes and the mosquitoes and so forth, and not come back. The next one is your picture in the back seat of the Phantom KTRB.
KTRB was the squadron emblem, and it meant kill those red bastards.
All right. And all right, next one is, let's see. The next one looks like you're refueling.
That was an air-to-air refueling mission that we were flying, and it was out over the South China Sea. And I was in a plane opposite this and just snapped that photo.
That is a Phantom.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And of course, it had it somewhat camouflaged itself so that it wouldn't get shot up as much. Now, how long did it take you to refuel like that?
Oh, just a matter of a few minutes. We had to the KC-135 above us that was refueling us is much slower than the Phantom, and so it had to go into a nose-down angle.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question. This thing on the wing, that pod on the wing, is that your a fuel tank or is that explosive? Can you, from your picture, can you tell
No,
what it is?
That's a fuel tank.
Fuel tank, okay. They have really enjoyed the fuel tanks that y'all left over there. Now they've made them into boats.
Is that right?
They've got whole fishing fleets of fuel tanks that they have cut the holes in, and so the man can get in there. And they have done a really good job fixing up those fuel tanks. They really appreciated y'all's dejected fuel tanks there.
Well, I'm glad we could cooperate.
All right, now it looks like you're having a briefing, ready to decide what you're going to do for the day or whatever. It says daily briefing.
Yeah, actually, this is probably a debriefing after a flight, and I can't recall the specifics on it.
Well, I imagine a good part of it was pretty much the same thing every day.
It was.
Yeah. All right. And now we're seeing you outside of a Quonset hut with a Jeep. Flight surgeon's office and ambulance, it says.
You should explain the difference between your offices and the other doctor's offices.
Well, you know, there was a bit of animosity between the flight surgeon and the other doctors. This was the largest hospital in Vietnam, and we had almost every medical and surgical subspecialty represented. But while they were sleeping in tents, we were sleeping in air-conditioned quarters with the pilots. And while we had warm showers, they had nothing but cold water. And it didn't engender a lot of camaraderie.
Yeah, I understand that. Us Army folks, especially ground pounders, we always said that the Air Force didn't get combat pay; they got inconvenience pay. Ice cream would melt, the air conditioner would break down, that sort of stuff. You know how it is. We tease each other.
Well, you know, it's a standing joke about another serviceman said, I can understand how you get flight pay and combat pay. What I don't understand is why you get base pay.
Yeah. Well, Ranh Bay was a pretty nice place anyway. That was a big place with the ocean right there. How many times did you get a chance to go swimming in Ranh Bay?
I don't even think I went once. I don't think I went swimming once.
Oh, okay. I guess you were too busy between flying and being a flight surgeon. I don't imagine you had a whole lot of spare time.
I was busy. It was safe too. It was an all-American base, and it was a peninsula that was surrounded on three sides by water, so you felt secure there. Now that changed later, but not when I was there.
Yeah. Now, as a flight surgeon, you had access to the hospital. So if you had someone in the hospital, you could go in and take care of them and so forth?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Yeah. And do you have an office there in the hospital, or were you in that Quonset hut that you showed?
No, the hospital, part of it was air conditioned, and other parts it weren't. But if I admitted a patient to it, then I would take care of the patient. But usually, if it would be some problem with surgery or something, I would admit it to the care of a surgeon.
Yeah, okay. Next
Explain
picture. I'm sorry.
Explain that you had duty once a month, too, in the hospital.
We had, since I was a lowly captain, we were junior officer, and each of us had duty once a month to cover the emergency room for the hospital.
Okay. All right. The next picture is a picture of a French cannon.
That was done at Can Tho. No, I'm sorry, Vung Tau. The French have a penchant for defensive warfare. They built these cannons pointing out into the bay because they knew the Japanese would sail into the bay. It didn't work that way. The Japanese walked behind them, and they couldn't turn the cannons around and just captured it without firing a shot. So that I like this picture because it shows an old lady out drying her wash on the cannon barrel.
Yes, for those out there who are not totally up to the history, we actually helped Ho Chi Minh during World War II to trying to run the Japanese who had control of Vietnam during their part of the war. And then he, in turn, turned the weapons rack around and used them against us later. Vung Tau was a R&R center. Some of you out there may have seen the TV series China Beach, which is in Da Nang, and I can tell you, because I've been there, it's an absolutely gorgeous place. But Vung Tau was a little bit farther up. It was more for the Army. It was an R&R center. We always used to hear the rumors that the Viet Cong had one section of Vung Tau for an R&R center, and then American soldiers had another part of Vung Tau for R&R. But that's where the beach and the R&R center was. I guess you had flight surgeon duties there also, because I know that not too far away was Benoit Air Base. And what did you do at Vung Tau? What was your duty at Vung Tau?
At Vung Tau, it was I was sent there as a liaison. It was basically an Army base, but we had Air Force pilots flying out of there, usually Caribous and C-130s and some helicopters. But my job was to take care of the Air Force personnel and to act as some type of liaison with the Army there.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of cases did you mostly treat?
Oh, well, Vung Tau was a in-country R&R, and everybody out there had gonorrhea or some type of venereal disease, and I could hardly wait to get out of there because I just couldn't find more than 200 ways to be creative and treat gonorrhea.
That's true. That I knew a lot of guys got their weekly penicillin shots. And,
well, the town of Vung Tau had an ordinance that you would not sleep with any woman who was not your wife. So they passed another ordinance that gave you a 24-hour marriage license.
That sounds about right for the R&R Center.
That's right.
Yeah. For those of you out there, R&R Center, there was R&R centers. If you're going to go for a week R&R, you would go to Hong Kong, Hawaii, Australia, and so forth. But if you could get a 3-day pass R&R, then you go someplace like Vung Tau, which had lots of alcohol to drink at the beaches, and you could take partake of the ladies who were probably not as clean as they should be. But it was part of the process. That's the reason you had a lot of penicillin shots.
We had a plague epidemic while I was there too, bubonic plague, and so that was always fun.
Oh, all the good things of Vietnam.
Oh yes, because of the rats.
Yeah. Oh yes. Everybody has, all Vietnam veterans just about has a rat story. The next picture is a picture of someone moving through the jungle.
Yeah. That was a picture that I took of one of the fellows that was with me when I went down into the jungle to investigate the crash.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. But talk about your jungle survival in Philippines.
I'm sorry, Marcia, I couldn't understand what you said in the background.
I was asking the doc to tell you about his jungle survival training in the Philippines about a couple months after you arrived in Vietnam, and they sent him down to the Philippines, and they had to go. They had to try to stay away from the local Filipinos, and be able to get back to camp without being discovered.
Yeah, that's the search and rescue school that they had to teach you how to be a POW. Yeah.
Well, everyone that flew any combat over Vietnam had to go through jungle survival school. Most of the young men or even young or middle-aged men were urban raised, and so they were strangers to the jungle. The Air Force hired Negritos, which were pygmies inherent to the Philippines, who had helped us a great deal during World War II, but they were black and about 4 feet tall and wore breechclouts and filed their teeth down into points. But they had no permanent home. When they got tired, they just lie down in the leaves and go to sleep. But they were excellent trackers. So the Air Force hired them to track us down and gave us 2 chits to, if we were caught, we gave it to to them, and they would take it back and redeem it for some rice or whatever they wanted. My partner and I were the only 2 out of 300 pilots that got through it without being caught by them. It was a good combination because my partner had been shot down twice in Korea and had been captured twice and escaped twice. So he knew what he was doing, and I'd been raised in a Florida swamp, and it was like throwing a rabbit back in the briar patch. I was perfectly at home.
It sounds like in the Florida swamps and so forth. I've got a good friend of mine was Air Force that was shot down in Norman Gaddis. Brigadier General Norman Gaddis was shot down and was there at Hanoi Hilton for quite a bit. And but I also have friends that were captured that were in the jungles of Vietnam in the tiger cages. One of my friends, Nick Rowe, spent 5 years in a tiger cage out there in the jungles. And when he came back, they put him at Fort Bragg, and he started a search evasion school. It's called SEER, and he taught pilots and so forth how to survive being a POW at Fort Bragg for a while. But you were going through your experience before he got back from being captured. He escaped from Vietnam and came back, and they put him in teaching SEER school. The next picture shows you Papa San's Mending Nets in Can Tho.
That's correct.
All right.
That's just a local scene photo.
All right. Lots of fishermen at the ocean too. Some good fish. All right. Next one is another. It says Can Tho, and it's another village scene. Those are definitely don't look like Vietnamese houses back there. They look, but villagers, mama sons, and kind of a market there. Somebody going down on the road on the bicycle.
It was a street scene.
Okay. Now, where was Can Tho in relation to where you were normally? At Cameron.
Oh, Can Tho.
Oh, you were
down in the Delta.
Down more in the, okay. That's why I knew. Being as a private and a specialist, they didn't tell me where I was going. They just told me to go, and I followed. So I don't know whatever happened because I never saw a map. So now we got boat in Vung Tau.
This one.
Yes, well, that's just a shot of a boat coming in Vung Tau.
Okay. All right, the next one. Picking up soldiers. It's a slick coming in, and I think it looks like there's an arm of a soldier on the one side. So is that when they're picking you up from going out and checking on the...
No, that was when one of the Korean Marines that bailed out of the helicopter. I mean, the pilots wouldn't land. We had to jump out of the helicopters from about 15 feet up.
Yeah.
And he fell and probably broke his ankle, and we had to evacuate him, and that's when we were trying to get him back out of there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they didn't like to sit on the ground a long time because they were pretty good targets sitting there. All right. Next one shows the last days in Vietnam, and you're standing in front of a Phantom.
That's right. No, it's most pilots are as superstitious as sailors, and you don't have your picture taken in front of the airplane. It's bad luck. So I had turned in all of my gear and went after my last mission and came back out to pose for that picture.
I understand that. How long before you took from the time you derosed home till you took your last flight? I went in retirement about 30 days before I was supposed to come home. I told them if they wanted me bad enough, they'd have to come get me.
Probably less.
We're losing you there.
Yeah, probably less than 30 days. I can't recall.
Okay. All right. Now let's talk about this book that we got out there with the time we have left. What made you write this book? And was Sharkbait, was that your call sign when you were flying? Is that where you come up with the name?
It was the call sign. It was the call sign of one of the squadrons, 557th Tactical Fighter Squadron. There were 4 squadrons of F-4s on base, and one of the others was the 558th, and its call sign was Phantom. Another call sign for the 559th was Whiskey, and the 391st was Hammer. And Bill Simmons was another doctor over there who was killed on a mission, and he was the associated with the 558th. So that after he was killed, I took over all of the squadrons, and I just thought that shark bait sounded a little more sexy than hammer.
All right. All right. Tell us about your book and what made you write it, and then we're going to talk about how to get it.
Well, about 4 or 5 years ago, we had a scare from a fire out here, and we lived on the edge of the evacuation zone. And so I was going through the house trying to figure out what I absolutely had to save, and I stumbled on this footlocker full of handwritten notes from Vietnam. I was pretty compulsive about taking notes and writing up all my missions. My first impulse was to throw them out. I said, you haven't looked at these things in 40-something years. Why don't you just throw them out? But the other side of my brain came back and says, but once they're gone, they're gone. And that got me into gear to sit down and type them up and get Marcia to help me with it.
Mm-hmm. All right. What is the story does it tell? Does it tell your story? Is it a biographic, or is it based on, or how does it come about? Using your notes is pretty much biographic of your time there? Your story?
Yes.
Yeah, with lots of history and.
I brought a footlocker with me of books that I'd always wanted to read but never had the time to do it. And so I filled up the eternities of boredom with reading books.
Okay. All right. So tell me a little bit about what all the book tells us. Why should we read it if we're interested in Vietnam? Why should we read your book? Other than you were dashing with your glasses on.
Well, it's just a chronicle of things through the eyes of a 28-year-old man during a time of war. It's history, and I recorded it as I saw it. It's one of those things that I'd never have enough time to do that again in everyday life, and I had the time then. And I thought it was worthwhile.
Bill, it's also not only a compilation of his notes from those months that he was in Vietnam, but with lots of insight and history and other things that he's woven into the book from today's perspective. So it really is a meditation on war and men and folly of history and the folly of warfare and the honor in why we go to war. It's a personal exploration really of his year there.
Well, I haven't had a chance to get it and read it yet, but I'm looking forward to it because going off the war changes you. And it changes your perspective, and it's interesting to see just how we took that experience and how it affected the rest of our lives for the rest of the days. Every person who went to Vietnam has a different story. Dr. Clark is talking about being in the Air Force and flying as well, and then coming back and still have to work as a full-time doctor. So not only did he have a full-time job as a flight surgeon, but also basically a full-time job flying. And when he was flying those supports, he also had a tendency to get shot at. Do you have any idea how many times your plane was hit?
Plane was never hit, but it was shot at many times. I remember one on my third mission, we dropped napalm, which we were flying in about 50 to 100 feet off the ground, coming back up a river, and I looked out on both sides of the cockpit. We were looking up at the trees, and it looked like a 4th of July demonstration. These were people shooting at us, and the muzzle blast that we were seeing. I remember telling the front seat pilot, I said, "Keep it moving, Major." I said, "We're taking fire." And we put it in full afterburner, and we were outrunning their bullets.
Yeah, the tracers get really big when they're coming at you, aren't they?
Yeah, they do. They do. And there's a lot in between each tracer.
Yes. Most people don't realize that the tracer is a bullet that glows, and it's usually one out of 7. So when you see that tracer, there's at least 7 more coming right behind it or right in front of it, and with another one coming behind it. But everybody has different experiences, and you really need to read the books. We're in now. It's hard to believe we're in our 50th year of celebration for the Vietnam War, and it's hard to believe that we've gotten that old and made it this long. As I tell people all the time, if I'd known I was going to live this long, I'd taken better care of myself. But the whole story of Vietnam War is different from each person, not only between services, between the Air Force, the Army, Navy, Marines, but it's also the location that you are and what year you were there. It changed a great deal from the time that Dr. Clark was there to when I got there. And then I have friends that were there long after I was, and sometimes it's like we're not even talking about the same war in the same country, because it changed so much. The Viet Cong or the communists had a great way of adjusting. We would have a tactic, and it wouldn't take them long before they would understand that tactic, and then you'd have to come up with a different tactic. You mentioned about 100, 150 feet off the ground dropping napalm. I'm wondering you didn't get your butt burned, because that stuff is pretty nasty, and it makes a pretty good size rising up on the airplanes and so forth. I guess the benefits you go flying fast.
That's right. It was the speed that saved us.
Yeah. All right. So out there, and Marsha, where can people find the book? What's the best way for people to get this book?
You can get the book on Amazon, and you can also find it at the Weeping Willow Books website, which is just www.weepingwillowbooks.com.
Okay. So those of you out there who want to get the book, and I know you do because you want to hear more about what Dr. Clark had and did in the Air Force and so forth. Most people don't ever think about the Air Force getting out there and going on going through the jungle. So he got to experience a little bit of everything going. Flying that airplane is one thing, but humping it through the jungle, knowing that there's bad guys all around you. And I learned early on, how do you tell the good guys from the bad guys in Vietnam? Mostly if they were pointing a rifle at you, you could assume they were bad guys. Other than that, you couldn't tell the difference. So out there getting around, I cannot imagine them sending a flight surgeon and a pilot out to look at remains to say, yes, they're dead after a week or two. Is just insanity. It's almost as insanity to having a firefight and then asking somebody to go out and count the number of dead so we have a good body count. That's a question. As an Air Force pilot flying, did they ever ask you, give us a good body count? We haven't got a good. In the Army, they would say, well, our body count's down this week. We need a good body count. Can you give us a good body count this year? Because I've been telling the colonel, and he's on my back because he wants a good body count to tell the general. I don't imagine where y'all are flying, you don't always know how many body counts you have.
No, we have no idea. And half the time, you wouldn't even see the target.
But you know what, Bill? One of the things that the doc did write about in his book is the talk about the bombings. Remember, they loaded the planes up for the generals who came to look. And they put all the bombs on the planes, even though and told you to go out and drop the bombs just to make a good show for the.
Oh, we had one day where they were filming it for propaganda purposes, and that's when we were running short of bombs, but. We took off and picked some naked hillside out there to make a good show of it for the movies.
Yes, we bombed a lot of empty rice paddies in the Vietnam War. One of the things that is strange, doing a lot of the research that I do for this show, is that I found out that y'all couldn't shoot at the MiGs on the ground. You had to wait for them to get up out of the air before you could shoot them. That's the communist jet fighters. If they were on the ground, y'all weren't allowed to shoot at them. You had to wait till they get up in the air so they could shoot back. That's an interesting way to fight a war. I thought the idea was to kill more of them than they killed of you, but if you got to wait for the guy to get up, then it just makes no sense, the rules of engagement that we had to go by. No,
there are a lot of things that didn't make sense.
You know, Hanoi is somewhat like New Orleans. It's built below sea level. If we'd actually gone in and bombed the right places in Hanoi and bombed that dike, it would have been underwater and probably it could have ended the war early, within a week or so because they'd have been underwater, and we just never seemed to bomb those places where it really made a difference.
Well, there was always the fear that communist China would intervene if we got too rough with them.
Yeah. I guess everybody was afraid that we'd have another Korea and so forth. But when you can't go back and fight the enemy at all, what kind of situation did you have going into Laos or Cambodia? Were you able to stray into there, or you just totally could not go, or how did it affect you and your flying?
We flew there fairly frequently. But you could not say, even on base, you couldn't say that you were going into Laos or Cambodia. It was always out of country. Tiger Hound, because the Laos was a neutral country and we shouldn't be there, but neither should the North Vietnamese coming down from the south. So everybody looked the other way, and there was a town called Chapone, which was a head of the Ho Chi Minh Trail in there. And even when I was writing this book, my stomach would tighten up because I never flew into that area, but what we just didn't get shot at all over the place.
Yeah, I imagine some pretty heavy anti-aircraft areas along the borders along there.
Oh, yes, yes.
Now, I had read and studied someplace that it said the American ambassador to Laos was so careful about neutrality that if a pilot was shot down, we had like 12 hours to get him out, or they couldn't go back to pick him up.
I wouldn't doubt that at all.
That's one of the reasons that people need to read your book and understand just how crazy the rules were that we put up with. We're fighting a war. But, when you start talking about, you had your hands tied behind you when you couldn't go to Laos, you couldn't go into North Vietnam, and so forth. All you do is just lose a lot of good American young men in the process of putting on a war. And I think the American people, with the wars we have going on today and the rules of engagement today, are even crazier than we are. And I think more people need to read books like yours and understand. We didn't seem to learn a lot of history out of the Vietnam War from what they were doing now. I don't seem that we have any strategy for winning. If we ever had, I was supposed to have had a strategy for winning. We were just there. And it seems like in today's wars, we're just there also. And we didn't seem to learn a whole lot of history. And I think more people need to get back and read.
We seem to be slow learners.
Amen to that. Slow learners and getting out there, and maybe more people with your background. I mean, you have a lot of credibility with the things that you have done while you were in Vietnam, but you've also got a lot of credibility with all the things that you have been involved with and so forth as a medical profession, as a civilian. So that gives you a lot of credibility. So when people read your book, it's not just another crazy grunt trying to make a point or whatever. That credibility is, I'd like to see more. I'd like to see more people in your situation write more books and so forth out there. As I mentioned a while ago, Norman Gaddis, when he ejected from his plane, he was at 2,000 feet with it rolling over and over and over again. 2,000.
I know him very well.
Do you? He lives here. A super guy. He's 94, I think now. And the last I talked to him, he was been out cutting grass at the farm all day.
He was the chairman of the Accident Investigation Committee when that airplane went down, and we had to go down into the jungle.
Well, he was not supposed to be flying a whole lot himself. He worked a full dog. He was head of the squadron or head of the whole group, and but wanted to fly.
No, I remember when he was shot down.
Well, actually, the missile blew up beside his plane and sucked up in his engine. He was captured. Like I said, he ejected at 2,000 feet. It's a long time if you're just jumping out of something 2,000 feet. But when you're ejecting out of an airplane upside down, 2,000 feet is not very far.
No, it's not.
He hit the ground and spent 65 hours in torture. The next 3 years in solitary confinement. And anytime you took off, something like that had to be in the back of your mind, just that something like that could be happening to you.
Well, you don't think about it. You just do your duty.
Yeah, well, you don't want to think about it a whole lot, just
No.
but I imagine that sometimes when you saw the flight coming up or whatever, it would cross your mind from time to time.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And all right, Marcia, again, the book is Snakebait.
Sharkbait.
Sharkbait. I'm sorry. I can't read my own notes here. Sharkbait, and it's available at Amazon and your site, which is again
www.weepingwillowbooks.com.
Now, if they weren't by chance wanted an autographed issue, they would contact you?
Yeah, have them go to the website and contact us, and I'll have the doc sign the book. And I think it's even a little bit cheaper on our website than Amazon charges. So it's good to go to the website.
All right. And what you should have done was put that cover of that good-looking guy getting in the airplane with those sunglasses on. I tell you what, all the young ladies would have been out there buying his book and getting autographed.
Someone told me before I wrote this that said if you don't have sex in the first 10 pages, it won't sell. And I said, well, there ain't no sex in here.
Well, if you talk about all that penicillin that you were giving out, there you go right there. That'll take care of it. All the Vung Tau chapter alone would be worth reading, just about being a doctor in Vung Tau. And,
well, thank you for your time.
Thank you all very much, and appreciate you coming on the show. And like to have you sometime again, a little bit, talk about how your book's doing. When you going to start your next one?
Well, I'm trying to get some short stories going.
Okay.
You should, Doc, tell him childhood. The doc had a very unusual childhood because he grew up in the Florida swamps and in Alabama, and he's got these wonderful stories of his adventures as a boy. So he's writing those.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, the swamps of Florida and Alabama. You should have been a grunt in Vietnam. You're already ready for the leeches and the mosquitoes and the bugs and snakes and so forth because you grew up with those things.
Oh, yeah, I grew up with them. That doesn't mean I like mosquitoes, though.
Now, when you were in that one you were out, you were in the Central Highlands, I guess, in the mountainous area when you were going out to look at that plane that was shot down. It gave me an idea. You were...
No, it was not in the Central Highlands. Oh. It was about 25 miles from Ranh Bay on the mountainside, so it wasn't that far.
All right. Vietnam is a long, narrow country. It's mountainy, Central Highlands, like the foothills here in North Carolina, and then the Delta or the swamps, where all the snakes and mosquitoes and so forth live. And it's different temperatures at different times, back where you were, it probably got cool at night a couple of times where you were.
I heard that it got cool a couple of times. It would frequently range between 110 and 140 degrees in the daytime.
Yeah. Well, I remember where I was. It got down to 65 one time, and I was looking for a jacket to put on. I was about to freeze. And but I've been back to Vietnam, as I mentioned a while ago, 3 times. Was at Dong Ha, which is right on the DMZ. And while we're out dying with the heat, putting a playground together for them, they're wearing jackets. And I can't imagine all that beautiful beach there, and you never took time to go down and stick a foot in the water.
I may have stuck a foot in it, but I didn't really get into. We had some Prumbo sharks out there.
Oh yes, and also they had sea snakes out there. Also, I understand. And,
well, those are more in the rivers. I took a couple of cruises with the Navy and their gunboats up the rivers, and the sea snakes were in those areas.
So you got to see a lot of Vietnam then between the air and on the ground and with the Navy and so forth. So are you talking about that your time with the Navy on the or swift boats or PBRs or both?
I can't remember. I remember that we went up to a small village somewhere up the Mekong, and went in there, had to wade in because you couldn't get the boat in close enough to treat some of the villagers. The VC had come through the night before in that village, thrown hand grenades into the sleeping huts of women and children, and we were there to help medically as we could. I had one kid that had a piece of shrapnel in his eye, and I did everything in my power to get a helicopter in there and get him out of there, get him to an eye doctor. But
so you got through all your job, you also got interaction with the Vietnamese people from time to time. Then, as a doctor,
a limited amount, yes,
yeah.
Yes.
That's gave you another insight of the war that a lot of people didn't see or don't understand. It was the temperament of the Vietnamese people. Did you have anything to do with the Montagnards, the mountain people?
Just tangentially, nothing direct.
Yeah.
I got a Montagnard crossbow as a souvenir. That's about as close as I came to it.
Yeah. I was hoping to get one when I went back, but I was too far south to get one when I was there. I knew about the Montagnards. There's a very large village of Montagnards here. The Special Forces guys bought some land in North Carolina up around our zoo that's very mountainous. It looks very, very similar to Vietnam. There's a couple thousand Montagnards live up there. So we have Montagnards here in town as well as up there. We have about 17,000 Vietnamese live here in the Raleigh Triangle area. So where you lived, is a good community of Vietnamese community also, isn't it?
Yes, and there are Montagnards up here. I saw one, I don't know, must have been 5 or 6 years ago that came down from Santa Maria. He had a problem with arthritis, and so I saw him. And they were gentle people.
They were that, but some of the best fighters we've ever had as far as loyalty and fighting for us. Are you still practicing now?
I'm working about half-time.
About half-time.
I'm doing the majority of the flight physicals for airline pilots for the 3 counties here. And so that gives me a chance to talk about airplanes.
Yeah. Do you do any flying?
I did, but I sold my plane, got out of it. I've got a spinal condition that I've had 2 surgeries, and I said that's enough. The last time I tried to fly, I found I had more trouble getting into the airplane than I did flying the airplane.
Yes. How did you get to fly Phantoms when you had eyesight problems?
Well, it wasn't. I was corrected. You see, I didn't go through military flight training.
Okay, that's right. Yeah.
And so that I had glasses and contacts and everything. I had 20/20 when I was flying, but at that time you had to have 20/20 uncorrected to qualify for military flight training.
Well, listen, I'm looking forward to getting your book and reading it, and I'm encouraging everybody out there all over the world that watches this show to get the book and read it and get it through Marcia so we can get the doctor to sign it, and she might save you $1 for postage or whatever. But get the book, read it, and then share it with people and so forth. You can have.
I was just, Guy, I was just going to ask you, back to flying the Phantoms. How did you manage without the rear view mirror?
Well, you don't have the visibility in the back seat as you do in the front seat. The Navy Phantom, you cannot fly it from the back seat. It's strictly an electronics warfare position. But most of the time that you were flying it was in reference to you would usually fly in a flight of 4 planes, and you'd fly it off instruments, which were the same in the back seat as they were in the front seat.
Yeah, now the reason I was mentioning, I served in Israel during the 6-Day War, and when we bought the Phantoms, the first thing they outfitted them with was rear view mirrors, and that was a big thing.
Well, we didn't need a rear view mirror because nothing could catch us.
Yeah. All right.
Well, Amnon says the reason the war was 6 days is because they could only lease the tanks for 6 days. So that's the reason the war didn't last more than 6 days.
That's good.
Y'all have a good evening, and again, appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much.
You.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.